My name is Adriana, and I thought I was living the best moment of my life. I was planning my wedding with Carlos, and everything seemed perfect. Barcelona was shining with the warm summer sun, and every day brought its own little joys. I was picking flowers for the ceremony, trying on my wedding dress, and tasting the cake. It felt like everything was falling into place, and I couldn't have been happier. But then came that one Sunday that changed everything. Carlos and I were invited to lunch at his parents' house, Elena and Luis. It was a usual invitation, nothing special really, but I was excited. I wanted to share all the latest wedding details with them, and I looked forward to a nice, relaxing afternoon. When we arrived at their home in the neighborhood of Gracia, Carlos and I exchanged a knowing glance. The delicious smell of Elena's cooking was already in the air. That smells so good, I said, smiling at Carlos. He smiled back, and we rang the doorbell. Elena appeared at the door, looking as radiant as ever in her flowery summer dress. "Welcome, my darlings," she exclaimed as she hugged us tightly. We stepped inside, grateful for the cool air in her house, which was a relief from the heat outside. Luis was sitting in the living room, holding a glass of sangria. He raised his glass cheerfully and said, "Cheers." The lunch was relaxed, and we talked about everything: wedding plans, the weather, our favorite foods, everything except anything serious. It felt like a peaceful, normal Sunday afternoon. But then, towards the end of the meal, something unexpected happened. Elena placed her spoon down and looked at me with a serious expression. "Adriana, dear," she said, her voice a little more serious than usual, "there's something we need to talk about." I felt a little uneasy, wondering what was coming next. "It's about the guest list for the wedding," she continued. "We think it needs some changes." My heart sank. The guest list had already been a tricky subject. We had spent weeks deciding who would be invited, and we had finally reached an agreement. I couldn't imagine what changes they were talking about. "What changes?" I asked cautiously. Elena took a deep breath, then said, "We think it would be better if you removed your parents, Antonio and Maria, from the guest list." I stared at her in shock. "We would like to invite some of our important friends instead." I couldn't believe my ears. What was she saying? My mind went blank, and all I could do was turn to Carlos, hoping he would say something to stop this. But to my surprise, he didn't disagree. He nodded slowly and quietly. "I think it's a good idea, honey," he said. My eyes widened. "Carlos," I whispered, "how can you agree to this?" He looked at me, and his expression seemed calm. "Adriana, my parents know a lot of important people. These connections could help me in my career. You know it's for our future." I felt a wave of anger and sadness wash over me. How could they say something like that? How could Carlos agree to this? "But they're my parents," I said, my voice trembling. Luis spoke up, trying to explain. "Adriana, we just want to think about the future of your new family. These connections will be very useful for Carlos's career. You need to understand this." I was in disbelief. They were all sitting there, looking at me, waiting for me to agree. Just moments ago, we had been laughing and talking about wedding plans. Everything had seemed so normal. And now, it felt like my whole world had turned upside down. Elena smiled at me, trying to be kind. "What do you think, my dear?" My mind was racing. I wanted to scream, to tell them how hurtful this idea was, but the words wouldn't come out. I glanced at Carlos again, hoping he would say something to make this right, but he didn't. In fact, he was looking at me like this was just a small detail to be dealt with. I felt so alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I whispered, "Oh, Silva." The word left my mouth like it didn't even belong to me. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Elena clapped her hands in delight. "Perfect. I knew you'd understand, Adriana. You really are a golden girl." Carlos squeezed my hand gently, but all I felt was cold. I couldn't understand how he could be so calm about all of this. I felt like my heart had been ripped out. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I smiled and nodded mechanically as Elena excitedly listed the names of her important friends who would replace my parents. Each name she mentioned felt like a dagger in my chest. I couldn't believe this was happening. On the way home, Carlos tried to talk to me. "You've been wonderful, my love," he said softly. "I know it wasn't easy, but you'll see, this is for our future." I didn't respond. My mind was a storm of confusion and hurt. How was I going to tell my parents? How could I look at myself in the mirror after agreeing to this? When we got back to our apartment, I locked myself in the bathroom. I told Carlos I wanted to take a bath, but really, I just needed to be alone. I needed space to think and let my emotions out. As I sat on the edge of the bathtub, tears began to fall. I thought about all the times my parents had been there for me. Christmases, family dinners, their encouragement during tough times. And now, I had to tell them they wouldn't be at my wedding. I felt so angry. How could Carlos have agreed to this? How could he not understand how important my parents were to me? I needed someone to talk to, so I called my best friend, Clara. "Adriana, are you O Silva?" she asked as soon as she picked up. "No, I'm not O Silva," I said, my voice shaking. I think I just made a huge mistake. For the next hour, I told her everything. Elena's proposal, Carlos's agreement, and my stupid response. "Oh my God, Adriana," she said when I finished. "This is crazy. You can't accept this." "I know," I whispered, "but what can I do now?" Clara paused before speaking again. "You have to talk to them, Adriana. First with Carlos. If he really loves you, he'll understand. If not, then you have a big decision to make. But remember, you deserve better than this, and your parents deserve better than this." After hanging up, I sat in silence. I knew she was right. I couldn't just accept this. I had to do something. That night, as I lay in bed with Carlos asleep next to me, I made a decision. I couldn't go on like this. I deserve better, and my parents deserve better. The next day, I would talk to Carlos and tell him exactly how I felt. I couldn't let this be the beginning of my future. I had to stand up for myself and my family. The next morning, as the sun was rising over Barcelona, I woke up feeling worried. A big idea was forming in my mind, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The days after my big argument with Carlos felt like torture. Every morning, I felt like I was carrying a heavy weight on my chest, knowing I had to pretend everything was fine. Carlos acted like nothing happened, going on with his day as usual. Elena, on the other hand, called me almost every day, excitedly talking about the wedding preparations and the friends who would be there. Every time I heard her voice, I felt a knot in my stomach. But deep down, my mind was racing, and I couldn't accept what was happening. I couldn't get married without my parents. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wedding wasn't what I had dreamed of. It didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like the end of everything I believed in. One morning, after Carlos had left for work, I decided to call my parents. My mom answered the phone, and hearing her warm voice made me feel a little better. "Adriana, my daughter, what a joy to hear from you," she said. I felt tears fill my eyes. How could I ever think about leaving them out of my wedding? "Mom," I said, my voice shaking, "I need to talk to you and Dad. It's really important." There was a pause, and then my mom said seriously, "Of course, honey. What's going on? We're worried about you." "I'd rather talk to you in person," I said. "Can you come to Barcelona this weekend?" 2 days later, I was sitting nervously in a small cafe in the Bourne, waiting for my parents. I had gone shopping with Clara to get away from Carlos's watchful eyes. When I saw my parents walk into the cafe, my heart sank. They looked worried, their faces filled with concern. I rushed to hug them and held them close. "Adriana," my father said, looking into my eyes, "tell us what's wrong." We sat down, and I took a deep breath. Then, I began to explain everything. I told them about Elena's request, Carlos's agreement, and my first response. As I spoke, I could see their faces changing from surprise to anger to sadness. "Oh, my child," my mother whispered, tears filling her eyes. "How could they ask such a thing of you?" My father, angry, clenched his fists on the table. "This is unacceptable. I'm going to talk to Carlos and his parents." "No, Dad," I said, gently placing my hand over his. "I have a plan, but I need you to trust me." They looked at me, curious. Then I explained what I had in mind. As I told them my plan, their expressions changed from anger to surprise, and then I saw a proud look in their eyes. "Are you sure you want to do this, Adriana?" my mother asked, worried. I nodded. "It's the only way. I can't get married under these conditions. I can't start my life with a lie." My father took my hand. "We're with you, no matter what. But are you sure you won't regret it?" I looked at my parents, the two people who had always supported me. They taught me the importance of honesty and respect. I told them, "The only thing I'll regret is not being true to myself and my values." After our meeting, I felt both relieved and scared. The plan was ready, but the hardest part was still to come. The next day, I went to see Father H. Antonio Silva at the church. I hadn't made an appointment, but I was hoping he would be available. Luckily, I found him in his office. "Adriana," he exclaimed when he saw me. "What a surprise. The big day is coming, isn't it?" I sat down, my heart racing. "Father Henry, I need your help." He must have sensed how serious I was because his face turned serious too. "What is it, my child?" For the next hour, I explained everything. Elena requested my decision and my plan. Father Henry listened carefully, not interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, thinking about what I had said. "What you're asking is unusual," he finally said. I looked down, feeling a little nervous. But then he added, "However, marriage is about love and truth. What you're proposing, even though it's radical, follows these principles." I looked up, surprised. "So, will you help me?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, Adriana, I will help you. But are you sure you want to go through with this? The consequences will be big." "I know, Father," I said, my voice steady. "But I can't start my married life with a lie." We spent the next hour working out the details of my plan. When I left the church, I felt both scared and relieved. At least I had help now. But the hardest part was still to come. The next few weeks felt like a balancing act. Every day, I had to pretend, smile when Elena talked about the wedding guests, and agree with Carlos's decisions about the ceremony. It was like a test every day, and every conversation felt like a challenge. I had to keep everything secret, not letting anyone know the truth. Clara was a big help during this time. Besides my parents and Father H. Antonio Silva, she was the only one who knew my plan. She listened to me when I needed to talk and comforted me when I had doubts. "You're the bravest woman I know," she said one afternoon as we sat on my balcony, watching the sunset over Barcelona. I don't know if I could do what you're doing. I'm scared, Clara," I admitted. "What if I'm wrong? What if I make the biggest mistake of my life?" She took my hand in hers and said, "Listen to me. The mistake would be to marry a man who doesn't respect you or your family. You deserve better than that." Her words stayed in my mind and reminded me why I had made this decision in the first place. As the wedding day got closer, I started feeling more and more nervous. I wasn't sleeping well, and I wasn't eating much. Carlos saw how I was feeling and thought it was just the stress of planning everything. I tried my best to stay calm, but it made me feel even worse. Sometimes, I would watch him sleep and wonder how things had changed so much. How had the man I loved become someone who wanted me to leave my parents out of our wedding? One evening, while I was going over the wedding details with Clara, my phone rang. It was my mom. "Adriana? Honey," she said, her voice full of excitement. your father, and I just want to tell you how proud we are of you. Whatever happens tomorrow, we will always be there for you." Those words gave me the strength I needed. I hung up the phone and decided that tomorrow would be the most important day of my life, but not for the reasons everyone thought. That night, lying in bed with Carlos peacefully asleep beside me, I thought about how far I had come. Just a few weeks ago, I was a naive young woman who believed love could fix everything. Now, I was a woman who was ready to fight for my values and my family. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would take control of my life. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind was racing. Had I planned everything? Was there anything I forgot? And most of all, would I be brave enough to go through with it? When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of pink, I got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Carlos. I went to the window and looked out at the city as it woke up. In a few hours, I would be walking to the altar at the Sagrada Familia, but it wouldn't be to say yes. It would be to say no. No to a marriage without real love. No to a life full of lies and compromises. I took a deep breath and felt calm for the first time in weeks. Whatever happened today, I knew I had made the right choice. As the wedding day got closer, everything around me felt harder to breathe in. The air seemed heavier, like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Elena, my future mother-in-law, was busy running everything. She was glowing with excitement, handling every part of the preparations with so much energy. Every day brought new changes, last-minute decisions, and more talk about the important guests who would be there. "Darling," she said one day as we were choosing flowers, "you can't imagine how excited I am. Judge Ramirez is coming. He's an old friend of Luis's. And Dr. Martinez, the famous surgeon. Oh, and Maria Elena, the mayor's wife." I just nodded and smiled, pretending to be excited. "That's wonderful, Elena," I said, hoping my voice didn't sound as unhappy as I felt. She kept talking. "I also got Chef Rodrigo to handle the menu. He owns a Michelin-starred restaurant. He doesn't usually do weddings, but he made an exception for us." Every word she said felt like a sharp pain. These people, these important guests, would take the place of my own family and friends. I thought about my parents, who wouldn't be able to be at their only daughter's wedding. My heart hurt. As for Carlos, he seemed more and more distant. He spent all day at the office, coming home late at night, saying he was busy with a big project for the wedding. When he was home, we didn't talk much. Our conversations were only about wedding details or small talk. One night, as we ate dinner in silence, I tried to start a deeper conversation. "Carlos," I said, "are you really happy with this marriage?" He looked up, surprised. "Of course, honey. Why do you ask?" I poked at my food, trying to find the right words. "It just doesn't feel like what we dreamed at first. All these guests we don't even know. And the fact that my parents won't be there." Adriana put down her fork, and her face slightly tightened. "Adriana, we've talked about this," Carlos said, his voice calm but firm. "This is for our future. These connections are important, even more than family." Adriana could feel the anger rising inside her, but she held it back. It wasn't the time to argue. She didn't want to cause a scene. Not now. Not during dinner. "I understand," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. She put on a smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, but it was enough to make it look like everything was fine. The rest of dinner passed in heavy silence. Adriana couldn't stop thinking about Carlos's words. The more she thought about them, the more they hurt. His family, their social circle, their careers. Everything seemed to matter more to him than her, more than their future together. As the days passed, Adriana could feel her best friend, Clara, watching her closely. Clara was the only person who truly knew how Adriana felt. She was the one who understood her struggles, her pain, and the loneliness she was starting to feel. Every day, Clara was there, offering quiet support. But Adriana had learned how to hide her feelings, how to pretend everything was fine, even when it wasn't. One afternoon, when Adriana and Clara were supposed to be finishing the final fittings for their dresses, Clara surprised her by suggesting they go to a small, quiet cafe instead. Adriana wasn't sure if it was a good idea, but she didn't argue. She followed Clara, knowing she needed someone to talk to, even if she wasn't ready to say everything. Clara led her to a little cafe, tucked away in a corner of the city. It was peaceful, away from the chaos of wedding preparations. Clara took Adriana's hands in hers, her expression full of concern. "Adriana, I'm worried about you," she said softly. "You don't seem like yourself. You've been so distant lately. What's going on?" Adriana tried to smile, but it didn't work. Clara could always see through her, always know when something was wrong. "I'm fine," Adriana said, even though she knew it wasn't true. She didn't want to burden Clara with her problems. Clara shook her head, not buying it for a second. "No, you're not fine. I've known you forever, Adriana. I can see it in your eyes. It's like you're carrying a heavy weight inside you. What's going on?" Adriana tried to hold back the tears, but they started to fall anyway. Her emotions finally broke through the dam she had built around them. She wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming. "I don't know if I can do this, Clara. I don't know if I can go through with this wedding. I feel like I'm losing myself, like I'm betraying everything I've ever believed in." Clara pulled her into a tight hug, rocking her gently. "Oh, Adriana," she whispered, "are you sure you want to go through with this? There's still time to change your mind. You don't have to do this if it's going to break you." Adriana shook her head, wiping away her tears. "No, I have to do it. I have to do it for my parents, for everything they've done for me. I can't let them down, but I also can't live a lie. I don't know what to do." Clara looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're the bravest person I know, Adriana. Whatever happens, I'll be by your side. You don't have to go through this alone." Those words, simple but powerful, made Adriana feel a little better. She knew Clara would be there for her no matter what. But even with Clara's support, Adriana still felt trapped, like there was no way out of the situation she had found herself in. She had already made the decision to marry Carlos, and now she had to follow through with it. But every part of her was screaming for her to stop, to turn around and leave before it was too late. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of preparations, fittings, guest lists, rehearsals, and last-minute changes. Every detail had to be perfect, every moment planned. Adriana couldn't escape the feeling that everything was moving too fast. She was just a passenger in her own life, being carried along by the tide of her family's expectations, Carlos's ambitions, and the wedding that had become more about appearances than love. Clara remained a steady presence, always there to remind Adriana of her strength. "You're stronger than you think, Adriana," she told her on the night before the wedding. They were sitting together on the terrace, watching the sun set over the city. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you can be proud of yourself. You've made it this far, and that's something to be proud of." Adriana looked out at the view, but her mind was elsewhere. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, she had been a different person, full of hope and excitement about the future. Now, she wasn't so sure anymore. She wasn't even sure she had made the right choice. That night, as she lay next to Carlos in their bed, Adriana couldn't sleep. She stared up at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing. The weight of her decision felt heavier than ever. She thought about her parents and everything they had sacrificed for her. She thought about the values she had always held dear: honesty, integrity, and the desire to live an authentic life. But as much as she wanted to follow those values, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to betray them all. The next morning, Adriana woke up early. The sun was already rising, casting a golden light over the city. It was the day of the wedding, and everything was about to change. She felt her heart racing in her chest, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. There was no turning back now. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Clara, already dressed in her bridesmaid's outfit. "You look beautiful," she said with a warm smile, stepping into the room. Adriana felt comforted by the sight of her friend. "You've got this, Adriana. Whatever happens today, I'm proud of you." Clara's words gave Adriana a burst of strength. She was scared, but she knew she wasn't completely alone. With Clara by her side, she could face whatever was coming. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The hairdresser and makeup artist arrived, transforming Adriana into a picture-perfect bride. Each brushstroke and pin seemed to bring her closer to the moment when everything would change. As she stood in front of the mirror, wearing her wedding dress, Elena entered the room. Her eyes lit up when she saw Adriana. "You look stunning, Adriana. Carlos is going to be so happy," she said, smoothing out a crease in Adriana's dress. Adriana smiled weakly, but it didn't feel real. Elena was excited, thrilled even, but Adriana knew the truth. The ride to the church, the Sagrada Familia, was silent. Adriana stared out the window, her heart pounding with each passing moment. The cathedral loomed in the distance, its towering spires a constant reminder of the weight of what was about to happen. As they pulled up to the church, a crowd of photographers and curious onlookers had gathered to see the bride. Adriana felt a wave of panic. She wanted to run, to escape, but she knew she couldn't. Clara and the other bridesmaids stayed close to Adriana, offering quiet support. "It's going to be O Silva," Clara whispered, squeezing her hand. Adriana nodded, though she wasn't sure if it would be. Inside the church, the guests were settling into their seats. The air was thick with excitement, and Adriana felt like she was walking through a dream. Father Enrique greeted her before she made her way down the aisle. He gave her a knowing look, as if he understood what she was going through. "May God give you strength, my daughter," he said quietly before moving back to the altar. The first notes of the wedding march filled the air, signaling the start of the ceremony. The doors opened, and all eyes turned to Adriana. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. But for Adriana, it was the moment everything would change forever. I started walking alone down the center aisle, and each step felt like it took forever. I could feel the eyes of hundreds of people on me. I heard them whispering and saw the smiles on their faces, but all I could see was Carlos standing at the altar, waiting for me with a big smile. For a moment, seeing him like that, I thought maybe we could be happy together after all. But then I looked at the people in the crowd and realized I didn't recognize anyone. All those strangers were friends of Elena and Luis, not my own family and friends. The empty space where my parents should have been made me feel sad, but it also made me more sure of my decision. I finally reached the altar. Carlos held my hand and smiled even more. "You are beautiful," he whispered. Father H. Antonio Silva started the ceremony, but his words felt far away, like I was underwater. My heart was beating so fast, I thought everyone could hear it. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony," Father H. Antonio Silva said. I looked at Carlos and tried to remember his face, even though I knew I was about to say something difficult. A part of me still loved him, but I knew love alone couldn't be enough, not when it meant giving up my values and my family. Father H. Antonio Silva kept talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. In my head, I was getting ready to say what I had planned. Then the moment arrived. Father H. Antonio Silva turned to me and asked, "Adriana, do you agree to take Carlos as your lawful wedded husband, to love and cherish him for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The silence after he asked felt like it went on forever. Everyone was waiting for my answer, and I felt like all eyes were on me. Carlos's smile started to fade because I was taking too long. I took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I can't," I said. My words echoed in the big church, and everyone gasped. Carlos looked confused and then shocked. "Adriana," he whispered. I turned to the crowd and felt calm, even though I knew I was about to cause a big stir. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I can't start our life together with a lie." People started to talk loudly, some angry, some confused. Elena jumped up, looking pale and angry. How dare you, she hissed. After everything we've done for you. But before I could say more, the church doors suddenly opened and in walked my parents, followed by my closest friends. The room went quiet. Dad! Mom! I said, feeling so relieved. They walked right up to me, ignoring the surprised looks from the guests. My mom gave me a big hug and whispered comforting words in my ear. I looked one last time at Carlos, who was still frozen in place. I'm sorry, Carlos, I said softly. I hope someday you'll understand. Slowly, I took off my veil and placed it on the altar. Then, with everyone watching, I walked down the steps of the altar, holding my parents' hands. As we walked, I saw Clara. She had tears in her eyes, but I could also see pride. She nodded at me in encouragement. Walking toward the church doors felt like it took forever. I could hear people talking behind me, some upset, some surprised, but somehow I felt lighter than I had in weeks. When we finally reached the doors of the Sagrada Familia, the sunlight hit my face, and it felt like I could finally breathe again. We walked down the steps, ignoring the photographers crowding around us. A cab was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, just like Clara had planned. As we climbed into the car, I looked back at the church one last time. Part of me was sad for what could have been, but a bigger part of me knew I had made the right choice. The cab took us away from the church, away from Carlos, away from the life I almost chose. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt excited to find out. The car was quiet as we drove through the streets of Barcelona. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts. My mom held my hand, squeezing it every so often to make sure I was O Silva. My dad, who was driving, kept glancing at us in the rearview mirror. I could see both worry and pride on his face. Suddenly, I felt scared. I had just said no in front of so many people. I had embarrassed Carlos's family. Maybe I had ruined his career. Panic started to rise in my chest, but my mom could tell. Breathe, honey, she said softly, sensing my worry. You did the right thing. I tried to calm myself and stop the racing thoughts. Had I really done the right thing? Was I being selfish? The cab stopped in front of a small cafe in the Gracia neighborhood. We were supposed to meet there after the ceremony. Clara was already there. Her face lit up when she saw us. Adriana, she said, running over to hug me. You were amazing. We sat down at a quiet table and ordered coffee. For a while, none of us spoke. The excitement of the day was starting to wear off, and I felt really tired. Finally, my dad broke the silence. So, he said, what do we do now? That was the big question. I hadn't really thought about what would come next. I had spent so much time getting ready for today, planning what I would say, that I hadn't even thought about tomorrow. I don't know, I whispered. You can stay with us for as long as you need, my mom offered quickly. It sounded nice to go back to my hometown, away from all the chaos and memories. But I knew it wouldn't be a permanent solution. I think I'll stay here, I said finally. I need to face what I've done. My parents exchanged a look and my dad nodded. We're proud of you, Adriana. Whatever you decide, we'll always be here for you. Hearing that made me feel so much better. It reminded me why I had made this decision in the first place. For my family, my values, and for myself. Just then, my phone started vibrating in my bag. There were dozens of missed calls, messages, and social media alerts. The world was starting to catch up with us. Oh my God, Clara muttered as she looked at her phone. Adriana, you're going viral, she said. She showed me her screen. Videos of me saying no at the altar were already online. And people were sharing them with hashtags like #CanItNan and #MarieFugger. I felt a tight knot in my stomach. I hadn't thought about how the media would react. In my mind, everything was supposed to be a private family moment. But with so many important people there, how could I be so naive? What am I going to do? I asked, feeling panicked. Clara put a calming hand on my arm. We'll figure it out. For now, I suggest you turn off your phone and take a break." I nodded, feeling thankful for her support. Just as I was about to turn my phone off, a message from Carlos popped up. My heart skipped a beat. "Adria, we need to talk." "Please," it said. I showed my parents and Clara the message. "Answer it," my father said after thinking for a moment. "But not right now. Soon. You both need to close this chapter properly." He was right, but the thought of talking to Carlos scared me. How could I explain my actions without making him feel even worse? The rest of the day went by slowly. We stayed at the cafe, away from the chaos, and talked about what to do next. Clara left for a while to pick up some things from my apartment. The apartment I had been living in with Carlos until this morning. When she came back, her face looked serious. "The paparazzi are starting to gather outside the building," she told us. "I think it's best if you don't go inside right now." I started to understand the full weight of what had happened. I was homeless, at the center of a huge media storm, and I had just hurt so many people. Guilt and doubt filled my mind. What if I made a huge mistake? I whispered, mostly to myself. My mother hugged me tightly. "Listen, darling," she said softly. "You followed your heart. You stayed true to yourself. This is not a mistake." "But I've hurt so many people," I said, feeling torn. My father spoke up. "Sometimes you have to hurt others to avoid greater pain later on. You avoided a marriage that would have made you unhappy. That could have ended in a painful divorce years from now." His words made sense, but I still felt guilty. I thought about Carlos and how hurt he must be. I thought about Elena and Luis and how angry they must be. Even though I knew I had made the right decision for myself, I couldn't stop feeling bad for the pain I had caused. It was late in the afternoon when we decided to leave the cafe. Clara had booked a hotel room for me to stay in, a quiet place to hide from the world for a few days. Just as we were about to leave, a familiar figure walked into the cafe. It was Father Antonio Silva. He saw us and came over to our table. "Adriana," he said gently, "I'm glad I found you." I tensed up, expecting him to scold me, but his face was kind. "I just want to tell you that you've shown great courage today. Marriage is supposed to be about love and truth. By not going through with it, you honored its real meaning." His words comforted me and took away some of my guilt. "Thank you, Father," I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. He put a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The road ahead won't be easy, but you made the right decision. Never doubt that." After Father Antonio Silva left, we went to the hotel. Night had fallen over Barcelona, and the city looked beautiful with all its lights. As we walked, I thought about all the times Carlos and I had walked these same streets, hand in hand, dreaming about the future. When we got to the hotel, my parents kissed me goodnight. They were staying in a hotel nearby, so they could be close if I needed them. "Call us if you need anything," my mother insisted. Clara stayed with me in my room, saying she would spend the night there with me. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," she said. Once we were in the room, the stress of the day hit me all at once. I sank onto the bed, still in my messy wedding dress. Clara sat next to me and gently stroked my hair. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked softly. I shook my head. I didn't have the strength to talk. I just wanted to sleep and forget, even if only for a few hours, about everything that had happened. But sleep didn't come easy. I kept tossing and turning in bed, thinking about everything that had happened. The look on Carlos's face, Elena's anger, the whispers from the crowd. My mind was full of emotions, and I couldn't calm down. Early in the morning, when the sun began to rise and the first light shone through the curtains, I got up quietly so I wouldn't wake Clara, who was sleeping on the sofa. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. Barcelona looked the same as it did yesterday, but everything in my life had changed in a single day. I had lost my Carlos, a future with Carlos, and maybe even some of my friends and family. But I had also gained something more important: loyalty to myself. I didn't know what the future held. I knew there would be hard days ahead with difficult conversations, and maybe even some legal problems if Carlos's family decided to take action. But for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with myself. I was no longer just the runaway bride who had said no at the altar. I was Adriana, a woman who had the courage to follow her heart, no matter what happened next. As the sun rose over Barcelona, I felt a new hope inside me. No matter what the future held, I was ready to face it, with my family, my true friends, and most importantly, with myself. If this story made you think or gave you a new perspective, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our future videos. Let's keep sharing thought-provoking stories and learning from life's lessons together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.